Okay, so my book was over Nicholas Carr's The Big Switch, Rewiring the World from Edison to Google. And we have a lot to cover, so I just wanted to give you guys an overview. Basically, I wanted to talk about the author, intended audience, other reviews, and I put a little review with mine there. I was going to concentrate mostly on analysis of the book, so this is going to go fairly quick. Who is Nicholas Carr? There you go. He's the author of IT, Does IT Matter? He's a pretty popular kind of guy within that realm. He's the previous executive editor of Harvard Business Review and has written for New York Times and several other promising publications. First book was Does IT Matter? And that became an instant bestseller. Right now he's writing another book, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. It's pretty interesting. I read a synopsis about it. It's going to be another bestseller. And he writes on the social, economic, and business implications of technology. That's his forte. It's his enjoyment, his love. So who does he write for? Basically, general public. Like you've seen, all those publications are kind of public in nature, and so he wants to basically inform people on technical subjects like IT. Leads you to think about the past and future implications of IT. He's very utopian sometimes, and then he can be very sad at times. So, I mean, the book has its ups and downs, its positives and its negatives about IT, and I'll discuss a lot about that. It's fluid and captivating, written for anybody in here, and written for anybody with, I think, the 10th grade reading level. A lot of people have written about his book. Nick Carr is one of the most insightful thinkers about technology's impact on the world. Quick, clear read on an important theme. Scary, no doubt. But as we prepare for the worldwide computer, it's not a bad idea to consider the dark side. He has a couple chapters about that, and this is me. Captivating, Carr gives us a real idea of the direction information technology will move our world. Just like when Edison invented the bulb and piqued our interest in electricity, Carr presents the idea of the future, IT as a utility. So that's basically the whole theme of the book, is giving you an idea of the future of computing. So this is a quick overview. Basically, each chapter: prologue, a doorway in Boston, gives you a little background about him. Burden's wheel gives you a little background about creating energy and how that transferred into electricity. The inventor and his clerk talks more about the invention of Thomas Edison's the light bulb and all that good stuff. Digital millwork, how it's all changing our culture. Goodbye, Mr. Gates, how the invention of the modern computer, PC, personal computer, has just kind of changed and how the direction is going. The White City just kind of recapitulates everything up there, and then sends you to the next section, because he divides the first 5 chapters into the first section, and then the last 4, I think, into another segment of how this demand is going to create for our kind of consumer purposes. So the worldwide computer, having a big interconnected web, is going to really change the way we see the computer, the way we see ourselves, the way we see our values, really. From the many to the few is another big chapter, kind of controversial. Fighting the net, that's one of the downsides about being really connected in this modern age. You have to worry about the viruses and the hackers and all that good stuff. A spider's web, that's kind of a scary chapter, and I'll talk about that. And then I Got, another scary chapter. Epilogue, flame and filament, that's kind of an interesting way to tie this back to the history. So analysis on the book, basically, the first chapter breaks down into Doorway to Boston, where Carr goes to a location in, if you can guess it, Boston. He basically goes to see Bear Center, where they are basically creating the new utility. If you really think about it, electricity used to be in factories, and basically it just started out where factories would produce their own electricity. And if you think about it, modern IT departments are within the own business. You have your own IT department running your business logistics and all that good stuff. Well, the new kind of IT information is having a central utility hub where your business, whether it be producing widgets, connects to this Center, and that Center processes all your IT. No longer do you have to keep software. No longer do you have to know the technical side of it. You just connect to them and they'll process your IT stuff. It's pretty interesting. He starts that out. So chapter 1 basically goes to the very beginning. Before the adoption of modern electricity, Henry Burton, which created this wheel, was invented back in upstate New York to produce more energy in his factory. Back then, you know, it was pretty hard. You had belts and conveyor belts and all that good stuff, so a lot of energy was lost when you were moving such machinery. A little snippet about it: Henry Burton and other manufacturers competed in part on the sophistication of their power systems. So modern companies have competed on the sophistications of their computer systems, IT. Whatever their main business might be, they've had no choice but also to be in the business of data processing. In other words, if you're ConAgra and your business is to sell food or create food, you also have to be in the IT industry to meet that kind of demand. So ConAgra is a great example. So the central message of this chapter is basically that change happened. It was a good chapter. The inventor and his clerk. This is an overview of Thomas Edison and how he basically revolutionized the world with his dynamo and electricity. In 1907, utilities' share of total U.S. electricity production reached 40%. By the 20s, it had jumped to 70%. The 30s, it hit 80%, and soon it was into the 90s. So this chapter kind of gears you to understand that utilities is a big important thing. It didn't used to always be that way. You used to have the factories producing their own electricity, trying to compete with other factories producing their own electricity, and Thomas Edison would come in and repair all those parts or produce the information like the dynamos and all that good stuff. His successor was Insull. What's his name? Thomas Insull? Samuel Insull. Samuel Insull kind of took Edison the next step and said, okay, we need to have a central utility connection. Modern computers, digital millwork, talks about the replications of tens and thousands of independent data centers, all using similar hardware, running similar software, and employing similar kinds of workers, has imposed severe penalties in the economy. So Carr is basically saying that one day your company can pull the plug and offshore or outsource IT to a central utility. Kind of scary if you're working in IT right now, because it might all be moved off to a different company. Salesforce is one of those companies that says no longer software necessary for a business to run. They'll basically run your software. You plug into Salesforce and they'll do all your customer relations management and all that good stuff. That's the whole chapter, point of this chapter. Since I'm running out of time, I'm going to run. The White City talks a lot about our jobs. A lot of that we discussed in class, how it's changing the factory worker. Back then, you had to be a skilled laborman to be working in one of the factories. You had to have a certain trade. Nowadays, once Henry Ford produced the factory line, he kind of like simplified jobs and it made those kind of craftsmen obsolete. So that's kind of the way that IT is working right now, too. Another interesting chapter. Part 2, living in the cloud. Worldwide computing, another way of saying in the long run the IT department is unlikely to survive, at least not in its familiar form. He has a lot to talk about that, and he introduces the internet and its changes to the system. Ties back to our discussion. From the many to the few, this is now the consumer side of what you guys would expect. Newspapers are dying, talented people are being forced into public relations work. It's just basically saying that the way that we're going now as far as technology is going to definitely change our jobs. It's going to see our these different things, crowdsourcing. Now you no longer have to hire in specialized workers. They could actually send it to free source is what it's called, and you basically, anybody that has enough time and willing, they can put in their own little time into a project. Company pays them maybe a fraction of what they used to pay an actual worker. The great unbundling, if you really think about it, this is very serious. Nowadays, we don't buy CDs. You go online, you can buy one song or two songs of your favorite artist. Unbundling television, you have all those services that are available, books and radio. So what does that do? That's going to change our environment as well. And he talks a lot about that. And then here's one of the downsides to all this change and creative destruction, fighting the nets, insecurity with new information technology. He kind of talks about how our network infrastructure is a little vulnerable because of botnets and other countries trying to attack our system. That's something that's still very serious. A spider's web. This is one of the most controversial chapters because basically started out with one of the AOL offered its information. People were searching information, and it offered that kind of data available to anybody to do statistical analysis on. And so people were finding that user 54698 was looking up, information that you would think is very, very wrong. And then people were finding different snippets of information, like going on to Google and finding their address and certain things. So all these little bits of information can kind of be interconnected to find so much of information about one person. It's kind of scary. This was one of Carr's longest chapters, so I think he had a lot to say about that. There was a great analysis on his part. I think it was very effective into kind of opening up our minds to understanding that when you log in, you're leaving bits and pieces of information. You're not just siloed to that one computer. People can actually read the information you're searching. They can track certain things. So it's very scary. You've got to make sure you understand that you're not alone, basically. People can see, and it's open to anybody out there. And then I got the direction that Carr really goes out on the premise and says that, okay, next phase in computing might be the interconnection between the brain and actual computing. People trying to adapt to a computer, maybe even cyborg. But he said that it's not the most revolutionary consequence of the expanding of the Internet's power, scope, and usefulness may not be that computers will start to think like us, but that we will come to think like computers. So he says that, what's his name? Google founders were considering to have a complete system of Google when Google becomes AI aware. Basically, it starts thinking for itself instead of having users provide information for it. And that'll be their greatest accomplishment. And then finally, the last section is the flame and filament. This is very thought-provoking when he thought, will we miss our old ways? Basically, now that we're all so advanced, the generations before us that knew how it was before we had light, before we had electricity, before we had computers, they're going to take away that knowledge. Are we going to forget what we missed? He uses a good example of a flame kind of changing the adaptation of the room. Flickers a lot and kind of gives you that depth, that richness of an environment. Whereas now, light, he calls it cold and steady. So it's no longer active. The people that were writers back then that kind of added that character really understood what it meant. And now we kind of lost that because we just know light to be steady and we don't want it to flicker. So that's it. And that's it.